Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the members. Amendment number 28 is a continuation of a bill that had been filed back in November that I actually encouraged all our members, along with the mandatory ethics training, to actually sign on to. And the reason that I put this proviso in as part of a legislative bill filing was to really get to the core of how to actually create transparency. It's one thing to want to police yourself, and I really truly respect that among members and understand why we have a legislative ethics committee on both the Senate and the House. But I think to be really quite candid, serious about internal checks and balances of how we conduct ourselves and how we conduct the business of the people, if we have that internal mechanism, we should also be quite concerned about making sure that those people who serve on that committee, and I consider that to be one of the most important committees that you could be assigned to. And I think that the Speaker made an exemplary choice on placing the gentleman from Northampton into that particular position as we go forward. Even for the short time that he has actually been in that position, he has been able to demonstrate some good leadership traits and qualities. But this particular amendment is talking about all the other committee members and the chairman and wanting to actually provide necessary tools to an ethics committee. Now, some of you, after going through the shock and awe this past fall of many, many detailed reports coming out into the newspapers about individual legislators, I can only imagine for a particular committee how difficult that must be to handle. And coming from a tradition in a state in which we have the old New England meeting house style form of government, you can understand why the public, even when you want to police yourself, may have certain misgivings if you can't show and demonstrate to them that you're serious about the role that you are expected to step into. What this amendment actually does is try to promote greater transparency by actually demystifying the work during the proceedings of the Legislative Ethics Committee. What it's trying to do is actually require additional training and skills and enhancement, whether it's about interviewing, whether it's about trying to decide how to actually gauge the laws and interpret them when it applies to one of you, potentially. And if I were on the flip side, I think I'd want to have and make sure that those members of a committee, both Democrats and Republicans, were offered the best and the brightest resources that this institution, this leadership, and the Commonwealth can deliver, so that we can make sure that any time a particular case and incident is before the Legislative Ethics Committee, that we're confident that those members have the right tools and the expertise to deal with that. The other thing that this particular amendment does is actually make all decisions by the Ethics Committee, not during proceedings, public, including advisory ones. And for those people who think it's not important to inform the public periodically of what you're doing, even the State Ethics Commission oftentimes understands that they have to release certain information after they've done deliberation on a particular case. And in this particular case, we have certain things in place to be able to report out, but we have other things that might be way beyond the scope of a legislative ethics committee, way beyond the expertise and the professional acumen of those people appointed, way beyond even the statutes that might govern the legislative ethics committees or the rules that we adopt every 2 years that might be put in place. And because of that, I think it's also important to note it, that if there is something that comes before the Ethics Committee that is beyond their scope and purview for responsibility, I think we should also make sure that we have language that says something very simple. And the simple thing should be that they would be referred, the matter would be referred or recommended to an appropriate third party. And why this is important is because when you have matters that have great potential to be expanded beyond these chamber walls, like indictments, like bribery charges, like all of that, you might be able to rule as a legislative ethics committee on certain aspects of that like whether to keep them in a position of leadership or not, whether their actual matter has merit to be before the committee. But in reality, you don't have that authority to enforce a case. And so we would want to make sure that when you discharge a case that's beyond the committee's purview, that you would actually have a requirement that is recommended to an appropriate third party. And it doesn't have to be as extreme as an indictment case, folks. It can be something very minor that gets put before a committee in someone else's eyes. But nevertheless, what's important is to understand that when you put committees in gag rules of silence, it doesn't help the public understand what you're doing, and it doesn't help the public understand how you operate. So the biggest premise of this bill that I think is most important has to do with providing the necessary resources that would be in addition to just holding a committee membership on a legislative ethics committee. I think it is important to have external training. I think it is important to have resources afforded to you for enhanced education beyond what we are going to mandate for ourselves under our own House rules. And for that, I think it would not only help restore the public's trust that when we have our own committees, we make sure they are the best and brightest to handle any situation. We make sure that if something's beyond the scope of their purview, that they'll respectfully and most appropriately discharge it to an appropriate third party. And also we will make sure that when they actually come to a decision, it will be something that will not be held in confidence any longer. It'll be something that the public will at least know what has happened through their own actions or lack thereof. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And